On my last edit that went kind of viral, I had someone accuse me of stolen valor and of believing if I asked nicely that I could end war in the comment section, which is hilarious and something that people would normally let go. However, that got me thinking that maybe they needed someone to explain to them how words truly could end war. So let's talk about how World War II could have ended after World War I. So you can't talk about World War II without bringing it all the way back to World War I, because all war is just a continuation of each other. After World War I, instead of focusing on reconciliation and recovery, the Allied forces instead chose punishment. The Treaty of Versailles demanded Germany take responsibility for all damage done to the Allied forces and pay reparations by land, air, and sea, and money. They weren't light demands. They ended up having to pay billions of dollars in today's cash. And that was an economic burden that haunted them for years. And while the treaty was being signed, the world was still reeling from a national influenza outbreak that actually lasted for 2 years, devastating the national healthcare system and morale. Sound familiar? Like, history doesn't just repeat itself. It becomes more acceptable each time. And I'm not going to delve too deep into the treaty. It's a dense, politically messy document involving dozens of world leaders and national interests. The US never even officially signed it. And if you want more information on the treaty or on Wilson's 14 points, which I'm going to talk about in a second, there are plenty, and I mean probably hundreds of thousands of documentaries and articles that you can go and read online for free. And Germany didn't just lose the war. It lost its economy, its dignity, its future for years. The Treaty of Versailles reduced Germany's territory by about 10%, not 10% left, but 10% taken, and given to neighboring nations like France, Belgium, and Poland. None of the defeated nations, like Germany, Austria, and Ottoman Empire, had any say in shaping the treaty. It was presented more like a punishment list. The War Guilt Clause, Articles 231, it explicitly blamed Germany for the war and laid the foundation for massive reparations. The clause didn't assign responsibility, it erased the complexity of what had caused the war and put the sole blame on Germany. Those reparations crushed the German economy. By 1923, the inflation was so bad that children were using stacks of bills as building blocks. We were burning cash in the fireplace in order to cook food, heat your house. One loaf of bread could cost billions of marks. Unemployment was at an all-time high. Hunger was setting in. Political unrest grew. People were desperate, and desperate people believe anyone that will give them hope. While Europe was collapsing, the United States doubled down on military control. In 1918, the Supreme Court heard Aver versus United States, also known as the Selective Draft Law case. They ruled that the Selective Service Act of 1917 was constitutional and that the conscription didn't violate their 13th Amendment's ban on involuntary servitude. It's not funny. Or the First Amendment's protection of conscience. That meant that even after World War I, the world that shook the globe, the US was still preparing to draft its citizens for the next one. President Woodrow Wilson, despite being racist and sexist, was actually one of the more progressive. And he ended up putting forward the 14 points. Now, the 14 points are not about punishment, they're about prevention. They were proposed
Good man
as
from the New
self-determination
World.
for nations, open diplomacy, free trade, and most importantly, an international peacekeeping organization.
This was because his
That
14
organization
points seemed to
was
promise a
the
new
League
moral
of
order in
Nations
international
and
affairs.
was meant to stop wars before
No
they
more
started.
secret diplomacy,
But Wilson
reduction
did
in
end up having
armament,
to compromise
and a
with
League
the
of
allies
Nations
who
to protect all
wanted
countries from
revenge
aggression.
on the opposing side. And
He
when
didn't want
he brought the
revenge
treaty
as
over
the
to
French
Senate,
did, but there was no
Republicans
question that
didn't want to
Germany
give
should
up
get
US
off scot-free.
sovereignty to a global body, to Europe, to whoever you want to call it.
But while Wilson was
refused to
planning the
compromise
future of
again
Europe,
and took the case to the
Americans were
American public.
rapidly
He
losing
literally
interest and
went on
involved them in
tour around the
European
country to
affairs.
rally support. Unfortunately, during that tour, he did suffer from a debilitating stroke. Without his leadership, and with both sides refusing to budge, the Senate rejected the treaty. The US never joined the League of Nations, which is absolutely insane. So this idea that Wilson came up with, he couldn't even join. He came up with this big grand plan, and then he wasn't even allowed to join that plan because he had a stroke. But I won't talk about his stroke. It just seems that when progressive politicians end up getting a little bit of power, they get something physically wrong with them to where they can no longer continue their tours. But that's on the conspiracy side of things, so let's continue. Now, without US support, the United Nations was kind of powerless. They tried its best to stop conflict through the 1920s and the 1930s, but it never really had any power to stop aggressors. Now, by the time Hitler rose to power, the League had already failed to stop the invasion of, excuse my pronunciation, Manchuria by Japan, or Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. The United States ended up joining World War II eventually anyway, but far later than the rest of the Allies. And like the commentator Mika said, it would have been weird if we didn't. Like, if we just didn't join the war at all. But what if we had taken peace more seriously after World War I? What if we supported the League and signed that treaty from the beginning and focused on rebuilding instead of punishing? Maybe the war would have ended sooner, and maybe it never would have started. And maybe millions wouldn't have had to die. Millions. Millions. Over 50 million. Out of economic collapse and humiliation rose Hitler. He promised food, he promised jobs, and he gave a sense of national pride. He also gave the people someone to blame, and he also gave the people someone to believe in. Kind of sounds familiar, again. And if Germany's economy hadn't been broken so fervently by these reparations, then maybe the public wouldn't have been so desperate to follow him. And if the League of Nations had acted firmly when Hitler violated the treaty by remilitarizing the Rhineland in 1936, maybe it would have stopped there. But no one wanted another war, no one wanted another world war, so they just let it happen. Appeasement became policy, and that decision cost the world approximately 50 million lives. 50. It could be up to 60 million. That's such an astronomical number. Now this video condenses over 30 years of conflict. But history isn't isolated. World War II didn't appear out of thin air. It's the result of failures after World War I, of economic desperation, weak diplomacy, and political cowardice. Let me repeat, political cowardice. And these same conditions still exist today. Struggling people, big promises, and nationalism. All we want to do is blame other people for our pain. We celebrate violence, we idolize leaders who promise to make us great again. And it's all too comfortable to admit that these are eerie parallels between how struggling people in 1930s Germany saw Hitler and how Americans view Trump today. Wealthy industrialists and the general public that were promised a better economy after the Great Depression. The military saw him as a stable leader because he was funding them and was willing to use violence to get his way. Now, who was I just talking about? Which one of those two? Who? Whenever this next war happens, it's going to be a continuation of the last one. All global war is connected because every unresolved conflict builds onto the next. And here's my honest opinion. War is fucking dumb. We will never move forward if we keep holding grudges and demanding blood for blood. If every nation stood up today and said, "We don't want to fight. We don't want more dead kids. Let's talk," then maybe we could recover. But people are greedy and selfish. Not everyone, but enough of us. That shouldn't discourage us. It should motivate us. Because why would you let your opinion be, war happens, so let's let it. That's not practical, it's lazy, and it's a way to avoid thinking of those hard questions. Why do you feel others should die for you? Why do you feel someone that you've never met should die to protect a government that you don't even trust? I'm not a history major, I'm not a politician, I'm not an expert on anything, but I am a veteran. And there are people who will say I'm not even a real one. But here I am, in my uniform that they gave me. And I've heard stories from so many people who have seen bloodshed and who have been told that their pain was for the greater good. Where is it? Where is that greater good that they were promised, that we were all promised? I thank those who have served, because they shouldn't have had to. And when someone finally comes along with a real plan to stop war, you're damn right I'll listen. What kind of future are you okay with?